welcome to the Billionaire Twist. Today, I want to tell you a story about love, loss, and the unexpected way our past shapes our future. Join me as we journey through the pages of a childhood promise, a professor's guarded heart, and a library where destiny weaves its magic. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a piece of yourself along the way. The rain had started without warning, not the gentle kind that drifts lazily through the evening sky, but a sudden downpour that seemed determined to wash the entire university campus clean. Students scattered across the courtyard, laughing and shouting as they ran for cover beneath the old stone archways. But two people stood frozen outside the library entrance. One of them held a worn leather journal in trembling hands. The other stared at it as though the pages inside carried the weight of 20 forgotten years. Professor Adrian Hale had always hated the rain. It reminded him of memories he preferred not to revisit, memories of promises, of expectations, of people who once believed he was capable of love. Now, standing beneath the flickering yellow lights of the university library, soaked through his coat, he felt something unfamiliar pressing against the carefully constructed walls around his heart. Across from him stood Emma Carter, library assistant, book lover, the most infuriating woman he had met since returning to this university. And, as it turned out, the girl who had once written him letters when he was 10 years old. Emma's voice was barely louder than the rain. "You knew, didn't you?" Adrian shook his head slowly. His voice came out quieter than he expected. "No." Emma swallowed, her eyes glistening not just from the rain. "All those years," she said softly. "All those letters, and we never met." The leather journal in Adrian's hands felt heavier with every passing second. Inside it were dozens of childish pages, crayon drawings, carefully written promises, and one sentence written in shaky handwriting. "One day we'll meet here, at the library." Adrian had read those words only 20 minutes ago, and suddenly, the woman standing in front of him, the one he had argued with for weeks about literature, love stories, and the foolishness of happy endings, was no longer just Emma Carter. She was Emily, the mysterious pen pal from his childhood, the girl who once believed he would grow up to become someone brave, someone kind, someone capable of keeping promises. Thunder rolled softly in the distance. Emma looked down at the ground, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. It was just a childhood promise. Adrian felt something break quietly inside his chest. For most of his adult life, he had believed promises were meaningless, temporary, fragile. But now the past had returned. Standing only a few feet away, rain-soaked and heartbreakingly real, Emma turned as if to leave, and for one terrible moment, Adrian almost let her go. But then he spoke. "Emma." She stopped. Slowly, reluctantly, Adrian stepped forward, the rain sliding down his face like silent confession. His voice was raw. 20 years ago, I promised someone I would meet her here." Emma didn't turn around, but she didn't walk away either. Adrian took another step closer. "This library," he said quietly, "the exact place where we're standing." Emma finally looked at him. Her eyes searched his face. "Adrian," she whispered. And for the first time since returning to this university, the cold professor who never believed in love finally said the words that would change both their lives. "I'm here." The rain fell harder, but neither of them moved, because sometimes destiny waits years just to arrive at the exact moment two people are finally ready to understand it. And this moment, standing outside the library, was only the beginning of a story neither of them had expected to live. A story about arguments, about broken beliefs, about two strangers who spent weeks challenging each other's hearts before discovering they had once promised to find each other, long before either of them knew what love truly meant. To understand how they reached this moment, you have to go back Back to the day Adrian Hale returned to the university he once called home. Back to the beginning of a story that started with books and ended with something far more dangerous. 2 months earlier, autumn had already begun painting the university campus in shades of gold and amber when Professor Adrian Hale stepped out of the black car waiting at the front gate. He paused for a moment. The iron gates of Northbridge University stood exactly as he remembered them, tall, elegant, and slightly intimidating. Students passed by in groups, laughing, arguing about assignments, sipping coffee, and rushing toward morning lectures. None of them paid attention to the tall man standing silently beside the stone pillar. But Adrian noticed everything. The smell of old books drifting from the library across the courtyard, the distant sound of a bell echoing from the clock tower, the wind moving through the ancient oak trees lining the pathways. It had been 15 years since he had last walked this campus. 15 years since he had left as a brilliant young graduate student with a reputation for ruthless intellect and an almost frightening dedication to literature. Back then, people called him the future of literary criticism. Now they called him something else. The Cold Professor. Adrian Hale had built his career on dismantling romantic illusions, while other scholars praised the beauty of classic love stories. Adrian had spent years analyzing them with brutal honesty. Romeo and Juliet, reckless teenagers who made terrible decisions. Jane Austen's romances, social contracts disguised as affection. Poetry, about eternal love. Emotionally manipulative fantasy. His lectures were famous for one thing: destroying the idea that love could last forever. Students either admired him or feared him, but no one ever called him sentimental. Adrian preferred it that way, because believing in love had once cost him something he could never recover. Years earlier, before his academic career truly began, Adrian had been engaged. Her name was Clara Whitmore. Clara had been everything Adrian was not. Optimistic, the kind of person who believed that love was stronger than fear. They had met during graduate school. She studied art history. He studied literature. She loved stories about destiny. He preferred stories about tragedy. Somehow they had fallen in love anyway. For a while, their relationship felt like a contradiction that worked. Clara would laugh at his cynical lectures. Adrian would secretly admire how fiercely she believed in happy endings. They had planned a future together. A small apartment, a shared life surrounded by books and paintings, a wedding in the spring. But love, Adrian eventually learned, was not immune to reality. 6 months before their wedding, Clara died in a car accident on a rain-soaked highway. Adrian received the call while grading essays. By the time he reached the hospital, it was already too late. Something inside him closed that night. Not dramatically, not violently, just quietly, like a door that would never open again. For months afterward, Adrian tried to understand what had happened, how something so beautiful could disappear so suddenly. Eventually, he reached a conclusion. Love was temporary, fragile, dangerous, and believing in it only guaranteed heartbreak. So Adrian did what he did best. He turned pain into analysis. He buried himself in books, in research, in lectures. He wrote papers about the myth of romantic destiny, about how literature had misled generations into believing in emotional fantasies. His reputation grew quickly. Students admired his intelligence. Universities competed to hire him. But the man himself became something colder, more distant. He stopped attending social gatherings, stopped forming close friendships, stopped allowing anyone close enough to break his heart again. For 15 years, Adrian Hale lived exactly this way, and it worked. His career flourished. His lectures were packed with students. His research was cited across the academic world. But something else quietly disappeared from his life. Then one day, an unexpected email arrived. Subject: faculty position, Northbridge University. The message was brief. The university where Adrian had once studied wanted him to return as a senior professor in the literature department. A prestigious position, a chance to shape the department, to influence future scholars. Most professors would have accepted immediately. Adrian hesitated. Returning meant confronting memories. Memories of Clara. Memories of a younger version of himself who once believed love stories meant something. But eventually, logic won. Northbridge was one of the best universities in the country. The opportunity was too important to refuse. So Adrian packed his books, left his apartment in Chicago, and returned to the place where everything had begun. He told himself it was just a career decision, a professional step forward, nothing more. But on his very first evening back on campus, Adrian found himself standing outside the university library, the same building where he had spent countless nights studying as a student, the same building where Clara used to meet him after her art history classes. He stared at the tall windows glowing with warm light. For a moment, he considered going inside, but then he remembered something important. Memories had no place in his life anymore. Adrian turned away. He walked across the courtyard toward the faculty building, toward a future that felt safe, predictable, emotionally distant. And for a few weeks, that plan worked perfectly, until the day he met the woman who worked in the library, the woman who would challenge every belief he had carefully built over 15 years, Emma Carter, the library assistant who refused to accept his cynical view of love, the woman who argued with him about books, who laughed at his lectures, who believed stubbornly and fearlessly that stories about love mattered. At first, Adrian considered her nothing more than an irritating distraction. But sometimes destiny has a strange sense of humor, because the one person Adrian Hale wanted to avoid was the one person he had unknowingly promised to meet 20 years earlier. Emma Carter believed that libraries were the closest thing the world had to magic. Every morning, she arrived at Northbridge University before most students had even woken up. The library doors opened at 7. Emma arrived at 6:30. Always. Not because she had to, but because she loved the quiet. The early morning light filtered gently through the tall windows of the reading hall, painting the rows of bookshelves with soft golden beams. Dust floated lazily in the air. The scent of old paper and polished wood lingered in every corner. To most people, the building was simply a place to study. To Emma, it was something else entirely. It was where stories lived, where forgotten ideas waited patiently for someone curious enough to discover them. Emma had loved books for as long as she could remember. She grew up in a small town 3 hours away from the university. Her mother worked as a nurse. Her father had owned a tiny bookstore on Main Street. It wasn't a successful business, but it had been magical. Emma spent most of her childhood sitting on the bookstore floor, surrounded by stacks of novels and poetry collections, while other children played outside. Emma traveled the world through stories. She walked the English countryside with Jane Austen characters, explored mysterious castles and Gothic novels, cried over tragic love letters written centuries ago. Books made the world feel bigger, braver, more hopeful. But when Emma was 16, the bookstore closed. Online retailers and declining sales made it impossible for her father to keep the shop open. The day the final box of books was carried out of the store, Emma cried harder than she ever had before. It felt like losing a piece of herself. But something unexpected happened a few months later. Her father handed her a small leather notebook. "Write your own stories," he told her gently. "If the world stops selling them, we'll just make new ones." Emma kept that notebook for years. She filled it with thoughts, dreams, little observations about people she met. And sometimes, she wrote letters to someone she had never met. It had started as a school project. Emma's 5th grade class had participated in a pen pal exchange program with another school in a different state. Each student was randomly assigned a partner. Emma's partner was a quiet boy named Adrian. At first the letters were simple: favorite books, favorite foods, embarrassing school stories. But as the months passed, the letters grew longer, more thoughtful. Adrian was shy but intelligent. Emma was curious and imaginative. They discovered they both loved libraries. They both loved stories about adventure. And they both believed that one day they would do something important with books. Emma would often decorate her letters with drawings, tiny castles, trees, little hearts in the corners of the pages. Adrian's letters were simpler, carefully written, thoughtful, sometimes philosophical in a way that felt unusual for a 10-year-old. They exchanged letters for almost a year, until the program ended. Emma still remembered the last letter Adrian sent. He had written about a university library he dreamed of visiting one day, a place full of endless shelves and tall windows. Emma wrote back with excitement. She told him she wanted to visit that same library someday. At the bottom of the letter, she wrote something that felt very serious at the time. A promise. One day we'll meet there, at the library. But after that, the letters stopped. Emma never knew why. Maybe Adrian's family moved. Maybe the program ended completely. Maybe life simply carried them in different directions. Over the years, Emma occasionally wondered what had happened to the quiet boy who wrote such thoughtful letters. But childhood promises fade easily. Eventually, she stopped thinking about him. Life moved forward. Emma worked hard in school. She earned a scholarship to Northbridge University. Ironically, the very university Adrian had once mentioned in his letters. Emma initially planned to study literature, but financial realities changed her path. Tuition was expensive. Her mother needed help paying bills. So Emma accepted a part-time job at the university library during her first semester. And something unexpected happened. She fell in love with the job. Not just the books, but the atmosphere, helping students find forgotten texts, organizing rare manuscripts, discovering beautiful old editions of novels hidden deep within the archives. The library became Emma's second home. By the time she graduated, the head librarian offered her a permanent position. Emma accepted immediately. For the past 4 years, she had worked there full-time, quietly building a life surrounded by stories. Unlike Professor Adrian Hale, Emma Carter believed something very simple. Stories about love mattered, not because they were perfect, but because they reminded people what hope looked like. She believed in the power of kindness, in second chances, in the strange ways destiny sometimes connected people across time. Her coworkers often teased her for it. Emma. One of them once laughed. "You read too many romance novels." Emma always smiled in response. "Maybe," she said, "but the world needs people who still believe in happy endings." She had no idea how dramatically that belief would soon be tested, because one quiet autumn morning, while Emma was organizing returned books behind the front desk, the library doors opened, and Professor Adrian Hale walked inside for the first time. Their worlds were about to collide, and neither of them would leave that library unchanged. The first time Emma Carter met Professor Adrian Hale, she didn't know who he was, which, as it turned out, was the worst possible way to meet a man whose reputation filled lecture halls. It was a quiet Thursday morning. The library was unusually peaceful. Students sat scattered around the reading hall, buried in textbooks and glowing laptop screens. Outside the tall windows, autumn leaves drifted slowly through the air. Emma stood behind the front desk, organizing returned books into small stacks. A philosophy text, a collection of Shakespearean sonnets, a badly worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. She paused when she noticed that one. The spine was cracked nearly in half, its pages filled with tiny pencil notes from past readers. Emma smiled. "Some stories," she murmured to herself, "refuse to be forgotten." At that moment, the library doors opened. A tall man stepped inside. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to being respected. His dark coat was neatly pressed, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Emma didn't look up right away. She was busy placing the Austen novel into a protective sleeve. The man approached the desk. "Excuse me." His voice was calm. Controlled. Emma glanced up and immediately noticed something unusual. His eyes, sharp, observant, almost intimidating, but also tired, as though he had spent years carrying thoughts no one else could see. "Yes," Emma said politely. "I'm looking for the university archives." The man replied. Emma nodded. "Second floor. East wing. Rare manuscript section." The man paused. "I was told access requires authorization." Emma smiled. "That depends." "On what? Whether you're faculty." The man reached into his coat pocket and produced a small identification card. Emma glanced at it, then looked up again. Professor Adrian Hale. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh, the name was familiar. Very familiar, even though Adrian had only arrived at the university a few weeks earlier. Word about him had already spread through the faculty. Students described his lectures as brilliant and terrifying. He had a reputation for dismantling romantic literature with brutal honesty. Emma had even overheard a few students complaining about his class the day before. He basically said love stories are emotional manipulation. One girl groaned. Another student laughed. Yeah, according to him, Jane Austen would hate modern dating. Emma had rolled her eyes when she heard that, but now the famous Professor Hale was standing directly in front of her. Emma handed back the ID card. "Well," she said lightly, "you're definitely faculty." Adrian gave a small nod. "I need access to the archives." Emma turned slightly in her chair and typed something into the computer system. "Research project." "Yes." Emma handed him a small access card. "This will open the archive doors." Adrian accepted it. "Thank you." He turned to leave, but Emma hesitated. Something about the moment felt incomplete. Her eyes drifted toward the book sitting beside her desk. Pride and Prejudice. Impulsively, she spoke. "Professor Hale." He stopped, turned. "Yes." Emma held up the novel. "I heard you're not a fan of love stories." Adrian's expression remained neutral. "Where did you hear that?" "Students talk." He considered that for a moment. "And?" Emma tilted her head slightly. "Well," she tapped the book thoughtfully, "I was just wondering if you've ever considered the possibility that people read love stories because they recognize something true in them." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Or," he replied calmly, "they read them because they want to believe something that isn't real." Emma blinked. "Oh." There was no anger in his voice, just certainty, absolute certainty. Emma leaned back in her chair. "That's a pretty depressing theory for someone who studies literature." Adrian didn't smile. "On the contrary," he said, "it's an honest one." Emma studied him carefully. For a moment, she saw something behind the professor's composed exterior. Something guarded, something wounded. But instead of feeling intimidated, Emma felt curious. "Professor Hale," she said gently, "have you ever noticed something interesting about love stories?" He raised an eyebrow. "What?" "People have been writing them for thousands of years." "Yes." "So either humanity has been wrong for centuries." Emma smiled. "Or you might be ent." A student nearby tried and failed to hide a laugh. Adrian noticed. For a brief moment, silence hung between them. Emma wondered if she had gone too far. Then Adrian spoke again, his voice calm, measured. "I imagine you enjoy romantic novels." Emma nodded proudly. "Very much." "Then perhaps you'll find my next lecture interesting." Emma folded her arms playfully. "Why?" "Because," Adrian said, "I'm teaching a class tomorrow called The Myth of the Happy Ending." Emma grinned. "Sounds tragic." Adrian turned toward the staircase, but before walking away, he said one final thing. "You're welcome to attend." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Is that a warning?" Adrian paused, just slightly. Then he said something unexpected. "It's an invitation." And with that, Professor Adrian Hale walked toward the archives. leaving behind a library assistant who suddenly felt very determined to prove him wrong. Because Emma Carter believed something deeply. Stories about love mattered. And tomorrow, she was going to argue with a professor about it. Emma Carter had not planned to attend Professor Adrian Hale's lecture. At least, that's what she told herself. But the next afternoon, at precisely 2 minutes before the class began, she quietly slipped into the back row of the crowded lecture hall. Students filled nearly every seat. Some sat upright with notebooks open. Others looked slightly nervous. Professor Hale had already developed a reputation. Brilliant, intimidating, unforgiving. Emma folded her arms and leaned back in her chair. "Let's see what you've got, Professor," she murmured quietly. A moment later, the side door opened. Adrian Hale entered the room carrying nothing but a thin folder. No laptop, no notice. He placed the folder on the podium and scanned the room with calm precision. His eyes moved across the students until, for just a brief moment, they paused on Emma. There was the faintest flicker of recognition. Then it disappeared. Adrian began the lecture. "Good afternoon." His voice filled the room with quiet authority. "Today, we're discussing one of the most persistent ideas in literature." He turned and wrote 3 words on the board. "The happy ending." A few students exchanged glances. Emma smiled slightly. "Here we go." Adrian turned back toward the class. "For centuries," he said calmly, "authors have written stories about love overcoming impossible odds." He began pacing slowly across the front of the room. "Two people meet. Obstacles appear. They fight for each other. And somehow," he gestured toward the board, "everything works out too." A student near the front nodded. Adrian continued, "These stories are comforting. They make readers feel hopeful. But the question we must ask as scholars is this." He stopped walking. "Are they honest?" The room went quiet. Emma leaned forward slightly. Adrian picked up a book from the podium, a worn copy of Romeo and Juliet. "Take Shakespeare," he said. "Two teenagers fall in love after knowing each other for approximately 24 hours. A few students laughed. They secretly marry. They ignore the consequences of their actions, and eventually they die." He closed the book. "The audience calls this tragic romance." Adrian folded his hands. "I call it poor decision-making." More laughter. Emma rolled her eyes. Adrian continued calmly, "Literature often presents love as destiny, but real life rarely behaves that way." He glanced briefly toward the back row, toward Emma. "Most relationships end. Promises are broken. Circumstances change." Emma raised her hand. Several students turned to look at her. Adrian noticed. "Yes." Emma stood. "Well," she said thoughtfully, "I think you're missing something important." Adrian gestured politely. "Please explain." Emma glanced around the room. "People don't read love stories because they expect life to be perfect." She stepped slightly into the aisle. "They read them because they want to believe connection matters." Adrian tilted his head. "Connection, yes." Emma gestured toward the board. "You're analyzing the logic of these stories, but you're ignoring the emotional truth." Adrian folded his arms. "And what truth would that be?" Emma smiled. "That people search for each other." The room went quiet again. Emma continued. "Across cultures, across centuries, people write stories about two strangers meeting. Sometimes by accident, sometimes by fate. But the reason those stories exist is because humans want to believe something." Adrian watched her carefully. "And what is that?" Emma's voice softened slightly. "That we aren't meant to face the world alone." The lecture hall remained silent for several seconds. Adrian studied her expression. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply believed what she was saying. Adrian turned slowly toward the board. "For someone who works in a library," he said calmly, "you have a very optimistic interpretation of literature." Emma smiled. Occupational hazard. Some students chuckled quietly. Adrian erased the words on the board. Then he wrote something else. He stepped back. Hope, he said quietly, is a powerful emotion. Emma nodded. Yes. Adrian turned toward the class again. And sometimes, he continued, hope prevents people from seeing reality clearly. Emma crossed her arms. Or maybe reality isn't as cynical as you think. The room felt electric now, a debate unfolding in real time. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then something surprising happened. He smiled, just slightly. Miss Carter, he said. Emma blinked. You know my name. You signed the archive access form yesterday. Emma shrugged. Fair. Adrian gestured toward the empty seat beside her. Perhaps you should join the discussion more often. Emma tilted her head. Are you inviting me to your class? Why not? Emma grinned. Careful. Professor. Why? You might accidentally start believing in happy endings. The students laughed. Adrian shook his head slightly. But for the first time since returning to Northbridge University, something unfamiliar stirred inside him. Not irritation, not intellectual challenge. Something quieter, curiosity. Because Emma Carter was unlike anyone he had met in years. She argued with him. She challenged his ideas. She laughed at his cynicism. And somehow, he found himself thinking about their conversation long after the lecture ended. That evening, Adrian returned to the library archives. He told himself it was for research. But when he climbed the staircase to the second floor, his eyes instinctively searched for one person. Emma Carter. She was sitting at a long wooden table near the window. Stacks of books surrounded her. A pencil rested behind her ear. She was completely absorbed in reading. Adrian stood there for a moment, watching. Then Emma looked up and smiled. Well, she said, did your lecture survive my criticism? Adrian walked closer. It was educational. Emma closed her book. Good. He gestured toward the stacks around her. What are you working on? Emma picked up one of the volumes. Restoring old catalog records. She hesitated, then added playfully, also researching examples of love stories that didn't end in disaster. Adrian sighed quietly. You're determined to win this argument. Emma shrugged. Not win. Just prove you wrong. Adrian sat down across from her. The late afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the tall windows. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emma said something unexpected. You know what's interesting about you? Adrian raised an eyebrow. What? You talk about love like it's a theory. And Emma looked at him carefully. But you sound like someone who once believed in it. Adrian's expression hardened slightly. That's an assumption. Emma didn't respond. She simply returned to her book. But the silence between them had changed. Because something had begun that neither of them fully understood yet. A strange pattern of conversations, arguments about literature, late evenings in the library, gradually turning into something deeper, something warmer, something neither of them was prepared to admit. Over the next several weeks, something unusual began happening at Northbridge University. Professor Adrian Hale started spending far more time in the library than anyone expected. At first, it seemed completely reasonable. After all, Adrian was known for obsessive research habits. The archives at Northbridge contained centuries of rare manuscripts, letters, and historical editions, exactly the type of material that fueled his academic work. But Emma Carter noticed something strange. Most evenings, Adrian would arrive at the archives around 6 o'clock, and most evenings, he would sit at the same table, across from her. At first, their conversations remained professional, or at least, they pretended to be. Emma would help him locate rare texts. Adrian would occasionally ask her opinion about obscure literary references, but slowly, almost without either of them realizing it, their discussions began to shift. Books led to ideas. Ideas led to arguments. Arguments led to laughter. One evening, Emma placed a thick novel on the table between them. "Okay," she said. "Tonight's challenge." Adrian glanced at the cover. A Tale of Two Cities. Hayseed. Charles Dickens. Emma nodded. "Yes." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "You're trying to prove something again." Emma folded her arms. "Of course I am." "What is it this time?" Emma opened the book to a specific page. "This." She slid the book toward him. Adrian looked down and read quietly. "It is a far better thing that I do than I have ever done." He closed the book again. "Sidney Carton sacrifices his life." Adrian said calmly, "Yes, that's not a happy ending." Emma tilted her head. "Isn't it?" Adrian frowned slightly. "The main character dies." Emma leaned forward. "But his sacrifice saves the woman he loves. That doesn't change the fact that he dies." Emma smiled gently. "Sometimes love isn't about surviving." Adrian looked at her. "Then what is it about?" Emma shrugged. "Choosing someone else's happiness over your own." The words hung quietly between them. Adrian didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at the open book again. Then he said something unusual. "You speak about love as though you've experienced it." Emma blinked. "Well, everyone has. In some form." Adrian's voice became quieter. "Not everyone." Emma studied him carefully. She saw it again. That same guarded expression. The one that appeared whenever the conversation moved too close to emotion. Emma decided not to push further. Instead, she closed the book. "All right," she said lightly. "Let's change the subject." Adrian nodded once, but the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Over the next few days, something subtle began to shift between them. Their arguments became softer. Their conversations lasted longer. Sometimes Adrian would arrive at the library even when he didn't need research material. Emma noticed. She didn't mention it, but she noticed. One evening, as they were walking through the quiet aisles of the archive room, Emma reached up to retrieve a dusty volume from the top shelf. She stretched on her toes. The book slipped. Adrian caught it before it hit the floor. For a brief moment, their hands touched. Emma felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. Adrian quickly stepped back, but the moment lingered. Emma laughed softly. "Careful, Professor." "Why?" "You're starting to look like someone who might enjoy romantic coincidences." Adrian shook his head. "That was gravity." Emma grinned. "Sure." But that night, when Adrian returned to his apartment, he found himself replaying the moment. The way Emma laughed, the way she challenged him without hesitation, the way she seemed completely unafraid of his cold reputation. For the first time in years, Adrian felt something dangerously close to anticipation, and that frightened him, because Adrian Hale had built his life on emotional distance. Allowing someone close again meant risking something he had sworn never to risk, his heart. So the next time Emma tried to extend their conversation, Adrian pulled away. It happened on a quiet Friday evening. The library was nearly empty. Emma was finishing her shift when Adrian approached the desk. "Good evening," he said. Emma smiled. "Working late again?" "Yes." Emma leaned against the counter. "You know," she said casually, "there's a small cafe across the street." Adrian looked at her, and Emma shrugged. "They make terrible coffee." "That doesn't sound appealing." Emma smiled. "But great conversation." The invitation hung in the air. Adrian felt something tighten in his chest. He knew what Emma was offering. Not just coffee, connection. Something beyond academic debates. For a moment, he almost accepted. Then he remembered Clara, the hospital, the rain, the silence that followed. Adrian's expression hardened slightly. That wouldn't be appropriate. Emma blinked. "Oh." Her smile faded just a little. "Right," she said quickly. Of course. Adrian nodded. Our discussions should remain professional. Emma straightened the stack of books beside her. Understood. The warmth between them cooled instantly. Adrian turned to leave, but Emma spoke again, her voice quiet. Professor Hale. He paused. Yes. Emma hesitated. Then she asked softly, "Why do you hate the idea of love so much?" Adrian didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet weight. "Because believing in it once nearly destroyed my life." Emma felt her heart sink slightly. For the first time, she realized something important. Adrian Hale didn't dismiss love because he was arrogant. He dismissed it because he had lost it. And losses like that rarely healed easily. Adrian walked away that night believing he had protected himself, protected Emma, protected the careful distance between them. But destiny had already begun weaving their story together in ways neither of them understood yet. Because hidden deep inside the university archives, a forgotten journal waited quietly on a dusty shelf. A journal filled with childish handwriting, tiny drawings, and a promise written by two children who believed in something Adrian had long since stopped believing in: destiny. Winter arrived quietly at Northbridge University. The golden leaves of autumn disappeared, replaced by bare branches and pale gray skies that seemed to linger endlessly over the campus. Students hurried between buildings with scarves wrapped around their necks, their breath visible in the cold air. Inside the university library, however, the world remained warm. The tall lamps cast soft pools of light across the wooden tables. The smell of old paper and coffee filled the room. And every evening, almost without fail, Adrian Hale found himself walking through those doors, even after the awkward conversation at the front desk, even after he had made it painfully clear that whatever existed between him and Emma Carter should remain strictly professional. He still came. At first, Emma kept their conversations brief, polite, distant. She helped him locate books, answered research questions, then returned quietly to her work. No teasing remarks, no debates about literature, no playful challenges to his cynical theories. Adrian noticed the change immediately, and, to his own frustration, he missed the arguments. One evening, he approached the archive desk holding a stack of manuscripts. Emma glanced up. "Yes, Professor." Her tone was perfectly respectful, professional. Adrian hesitated. "You don't have to call me that." Emma shrugged lightly. "It's accurate." A small silence passed between them. Adrian shifted slightly. "I didn't mean to offend you the other night." Emma placed a bookmark between the pages of the book she was reading. "You didn't." "But," Emma looked at him calmly, "you were honest." Her expression remained neutral. But Adrian sensed something behind it. Disappointment. Not anger. Just quiet disappointment. Adrian cleared his throat. "I simply believe boundaries are important." Emma nodded slowly. "Of course." She returned to her book. The conversation ended there. And yet, Adrian didn't leave. He sat at a nearby table, pretending to study a collection of 19th century letters. But his attention kept drifting toward Emma, toward the way she brushed loose strands of hair behind her ear, toward the way she smiled softly at students asking for help, toward the quiet warmth she carried with her everywhere. It made the silence between them feel heavier. Days passed, then weeks. Their conversations remained polite but distant. The easy chemistry that had once filled the library had vanished. Emma stopped attending Adrian's lectures. She no longer challenged his arguments about love stories. In fact, she barely looked at him unless necessary. And that absence created an unexpected emptiness Adrian didn't know how to explain. One night, as snow began falling outside the tall library windows, Adrian found Emma standing near the shelves of rare manuscripts. She was carefully placing several old journals into protective covers. He approached slowly. "Those are from the early student archives," he said. Emma nodded. "Yes." Adrian glanced at the faded covers. personal journals, mostly. Emma placed another notebook into a protective box. Students from decades ago. Adrian picked up one of the journals gently. Interesting. Emma hesitated. You can't take those. I'm not. Adrian studied the fragile pages. Just curious. Emma watched him for a moment. Then she said quietly, You don't look like someone who enjoys curiosity. Adrian looked up. What does that mean? Emma shrugged. You analyze things. Yes. But curiosity requires believing something unexpected might happen. Adrian set the journal down carefully. That sounds suspiciously like optimism. Emma smiled faintly. Exactly. Adrian studied her expression. For weeks, he had tried to maintain distance, but the truth was becoming harder to ignore. He missed their conversations. He missed the way she challenged him, missed the warmth that filled the library whenever she was nearby. And the worst part was, he knew exactly why. Emma Carter represented everything Adrian had tried to avoid since Clara died. Connection, the terrifying possibility that life might still hold something meaningful. Adrian finally spoke. Emma. She looked up. Yes, I may have been too abrupt the other night. Emma crossed her arms gently. You were protecting yourself. Adrian frowned slightly. You make it sound selfish. Emma shook her head. No. She met his eyes. It makes you human. For a moment, the old warmth returned. But then Emma said something that shattered the fragile calm between them. You loved someone once. Adrian stiffened. Emma's voice remained soft. I can see it in the way you talk about love. Adrian's expression hardened. That's none of your concern. Emma looked down at the journals. You're right. She closed the archive box. I'm sorry. Adrian turned away, but Emma spoke again, quietly. Just because something ended in pain doesn't mean the story was meaningless. Adrian stopped walking. The words cut deeper than Emma realized. He turned slowly. Sometimes, he said, his voice colder than before, it means the story should have never been written. Emma's eyes widened slightly. Adrian, but he was already walking away. That night, Adrian returned to his apartment feeling something dangerously close to anger. Not at Emma, at himself, because she was right. He had loved someone once, and losing Clara had shattered something inside him. But the truth he refused to admit was even more frightening. Emma Carter was beginning to reach places in his heart he had locked away for 15 years, and that terrified him. The next day, Adrian avoided the library entirely. Then the next, and the next. Emma noticed immediately. She tried to focus on her work, but the empty chair across from her table felt like a quiet absence she couldn't ignore. One evening, while organizing the archives alone, Emma sighed quietly. Maybe he was right. She murmured to herself, some stories aren't meant to continue. She turned toward a dusty shelf filled with old student journals. One of them slipped slightly from its place. Emma reached out and pulled it free. The cover was worn leather. No title, just faded initials. She opened it carefully. Inside were childish drawings, small notes written in uneven handwriting. Emma smiled faintly. A kid's journal, she whispered. Then she turned the page and froze, because the name written at the top of the page made her heart skip. Adrian Hale. Emma stared at the handwriting, then slowly turned another page, and another. Each page contained letters. Letters written to someone named Emily. Emma felt a strange chill run through her, because many years ago, when she was 10 years old, Emma Carter had written letters to a boy named Adrian. Her pen name back then had been Emily. Emma flipped to the final page and read the sentence written at the bottom. One day we'll meet here, at the library. Her breath caught. Outside the windows, snow continued falling silently across the campus. And somewhere in the city, Adrian Hale had no idea that the past he had forgotten was about to change everything. The days that followed felt like they were stretched between moments of clarity and confusion. Emma's discovery in the archive had shaken her to the core. The journal. The letters. Adrian had once been her pen pal. She hadn't known it. Not until now. But he had been the mysterious boy who, as children, had written to her across years and miles. The realization hit her with the force of a storm. All the little things, the way Adrian's eyes seemed to linger on her. The unexpected spark of recognition between them. The strange familiarity in the way he spoke about love and relationships. It all began to make sense. She wasn't just a library assistant to him anymore. She was Emily. But Adrian had no idea. The thought of confronting him, of telling him what she'd discovered, and the truth of their long-forgotten promise felt like a gamble she wasn't ready to take. The distance he had put between them after their last conversation hadn't helped her sense of timing. What would he say when she told him? But the truth, as it often does, would not be ignored forever. That evening, Emma found herself standing once again in the archives. The library was nearly empty. The quiet only broken by the sound of the occasional creaking of floorboards or the soft rustle of paper. She had just finished organizing a new batch of books when she heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind her. Adrian. She turned, half expecting him to turn and leave, as he had so often done recently. But instead, he stopped a few feet away from her. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with things left unsaid. "Emma," Adrian said softly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar weight. "We need to talk." Her heart raced, but she managed to steady her breathing. She nodded, slowly. "I agree." Adrian stepped closer. His eyes searched her face, as though weighing his words carefully. "I was wrong," he said. "About everything. About love. About people. About you." Emma swallowed, unsure if she was ready to hear what was coming. "You don't have to say anything. I know you've been avoiding me. I get it." But Adrian shook his head. "No, you don't understand." He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging slightly, as though admitting something heavy. "When I was younger, I believed that love was temporary, that it was something fleeting and ultimately dangerous. But the truth is, I built that wall because I couldn't let myself feel anything after Clara." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Clara, Adrian's late fiancée, the woman whose death had shattered him. The reason he turned away from love and connection. Adrian's voice cracked slightly. "But meeting you, talking to you, has shown me something I didn't want to face." He paused, taking a step closer to her. "You've made me see that I was wrong. That love doesn't always destroy us. Sometimes, it's what keeps us going." Emma's eyes filled with emotion, but she stayed silent, letting him speak. Adrian continued, his words pouring out with an urgency he could no longer control. "I thought if I kept my distance, I could protect myself, protect you. But I've been a fool. I haven't been protecting anyone, least of all myself." Emma looked at him, her mind reeling. Was this really happening? Was he admitting what she thought he was? "Adrian," she whispered, the words escaping her before she could stop them. "There's something I need to tell you." He raised an eyebrow. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she reached into her bag and pulled out the old, worn journal she had found in the archives. She opened it slowly, turning the pages to the one that changed everything. When Adrian saw the faded ink, the small drawings, and the name Emily written at the top of each page, his face went pale. His eyes widened as the realization sank in. "These are my letters," he said quietly. "The ones I wrote to you when we were kids." Emma nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't remember. I didn't know until now. Adrian looked at the journal in disbelief. But I don't understand. How is this possible? Emma met his gaze, her own heart racing. I was Emily. I was the one who promised you we would meet here. Adrian stumbled back a step, his hands reaching out to steady himself on the nearby shelf. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. All this time, he whispered, more to himself than to her. You were the one I promised to meet. You were my pen pal, the one I wrote to when I was younger. And I didn't even remember. Emma stepped closer to him, feeling a pang of tenderness for the man standing in front of her. He looked so lost, so vulnerable, that it broke something in her chest. All those years, she said softly, I had no idea who you were. And you didn't remember me. But it was always you. Adrian, it's always been you. The silence between them hung heavy, thick with 1,000 unspoken words. Adrian's eyes searched hers, torn between disbelief and something else, something deeper. I never wanted to believe in love, Adrian finally said, his voice a quiet, shaky admission. I didn't want to, but now I see. His voice broke slightly as he looked at her, a mixture of guilt and yearning filling his expression. Now I see that you were always right, and I was wrong. Emma placed the journal gently between them, her hand brushing against his. We can't undo the past, she whispered, but we can start fresh. We can start here, with what we have. Adrian's eyes softened as he reached out, his fingers brushing over hers. You're right, he whispered. I spent so long running from this, from love, from you. But now, he paused, taking a deep breath. I don't want to run anymore. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she looked up at him. For the first time in years, Adrian's expression held no distance, no coldness, only the warmth of someone who had finally allowed themselves to hope again. Slowly, Adrian reached for her. His hands trembled as they cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. His lips parted as if to say something, but no words came, just a quiet exhale. And then, in the stillness of the library, with the first snowflakes of winter falling outside, Adrian Hale did what he had promised to do so many years ago. He kissed her, softly at first, then deeper, with a long buried passion that neither of them had ever fully acknowledged until that moment. As they broke apart, breathless, Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. I kept my promise, he whispered. Emma smiled through the tears that had started to well in her eyes. Yes, she replied softly. You did. And in that quiet moment, amidst the dust and silence of old books and forgotten memories, the past finally became clear. It had always been about love, and the promise that, in the end, it was worth the wait. The days following that quiet kiss in the library were a blur of emotions. For Adrian, it felt like waking from a long, troubled sleep. The walls he had built around his heart, those cold, towering walls had crumbled faster than he could comprehend. He had spent so many years convincing himself that love was a fleeting thing, a weakness that only led to pain. But Emma, her presence, her conviction, her unwavering belief in stories of hope had shattered that illusion. And now, standing before her, he knew he couldn't go back. The weight of years of self-imposed isolation seemed to lift with every moment they shared. Emma, too, felt the shift. There were no more questions in her heart, No more wondering if the past was meant to stay buried. She had always believed in destiny, in the power of connection now. Standing beside Adrian, she saw that what they had was more than just a childhood promise. It was a second chance, a promise rewritten in the present. But as much as they had come together, something still hung between them, a thread of unspoken fear. The fear that perhaps this fragile, beautiful connection they had found could be torn apart just as easily as it had been built. Adrian was not the same man he had been all those years ago, but his scars ran deep, and Emma knew that no matter how much they wanted to, they could not erase the pain that had shaped him. That evening, as the snow continued to fall gently outside, they sat across from one another in the warmth of the library, the same spot where their story had begun to change. They had talked for hours about books, about life, about everything and nothing at all. But now, as the silence settled around them, there was one thing left unsaid. "Adrian," Emma began, her voice soft but steady. She met his gaze, her eyes searching his. "What happens now? Where do we go from here?" Adrian's heart skipped. His mind raced. He had come to terms with his feelings for her, but the uncertainty of how to move forward made him hesitate. He had spent so long hiding, so long convincing himself that the past was gone and that he had no future. And yet, in Emma's eyes, he saw something that pulled him forward, a chance at something real, something he had never thought possible. "I don't know," he whispered, his voice a quiet confession. "But I want to find out. With you, I don't want to hide anymore. Emma, I don't want to be that man who ran from everything. From you, I want to be the man who..." He paused, his voice breaking slightly, and then he met her eyes, his voice steadier this time. "I want to be the man who makes it right. For both of us." Emma reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. The warmth of her touch sent a wave of comfort through him, something he hadn't realized he needed until that moment. She smiled, her heart full of understanding. "I'm here, Adrian," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure it out. We have time." Adrian swallowed hard, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He had spent so many years avoiding vulnerability, avoiding the one thing that could truly heal him, love. But now, with Emma in front of him, he understood that the journey wasn't about avoiding pain, it was about allowing love to grow, even when it felt impossible, even when the past threatened to tear it apart. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice quiet. "Scared that I'm not enough, that I can't," he faltered, then gathered his strength. "That I can't make up for everything I've lost, for everything I've been." Emma squeezed his hand gently. "You don't have to make up for anything," she said. "We're here now. We can't change the past, but we can create something new, together." She leaned in slightly, her eyes never leaving his, as if she could see right into his soul. "I believe in us, Adrian. I believe in this." Adrian's breath hitched as he looked at her. Her words were simple, but they were everything he needed to hear, everything he had been too afraid to believe. "I believe in you," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. "And I don't want to let you go." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with the weight of his confession. She had always known that love wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was worth fighting for. And for the first time in years, Adrian Hale was willing to fight, too. As the snow continued to fall outside, they sat there in the library, hands intertwined. Two souls finally beginning to heal. It wasn't a perfect story. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was their story. And that was enough. "Adrian," Emma whispered, her voice full of a quiet certainty. "We'll make it through. Together." He looked at her, his heart full, and nodded slowly. Together. Weeks passed. Winter gave way to the first hints of spring. And with it came new beginnings, new chapters in both their lives. Adrian and Emma spent more time together than they had ever imagined. They attended each other's lectures, shared quiet dinners, and discovered that their intellectual debates were no longer barriers, but bridges that connected their hearts in deeper ways. Adrian was no longer the cold, distant professor. He was a man who had opened himself up to the possibility of love, and in doing so, had found a new understanding of life, of himself. Emma, too, found herself growing in ways she hadn't anticipated. She was no longer just a library assistant. She had become someone who had helped heal a broken man. Someone who had believed in a promise made long ago and had brought it to life. One evening, after a long day of work, Adrian invited Emma to dinner at a small cafe tucked away from the bustle of campus. The atmosphere was cozy, with soft lighting and the scent of fresh flowers in the air. They sat across from one another, their hands gently intertwined, the weight of everything they had been through still present but lighter now. As if the worst was behind them, Adrian looked at Emma with a smile, one that was full of tenderness and affection. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Emma's eyes widened as he placed it on the table in front of her. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm not a man of grand gestures. I've spent most of my life avoiding them. But I've learned something important these past few months." He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. Love isn't about avoiding the pain. It's about finding the courage to be vulnerable, to let go, and to embrace the possibility of happiness. He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver necklace, a pendant shaped like an open book. "I don't have all the answers," he continued, "but I know that this, what we have, is the most important story of my life, and I want to spend every chapter with you." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she looked at him, overwhelmed by the depth of his words, by the rawness of the love he was offering. "Adrian," she whispered. Before she could finish, Adrian reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "You don't have to say anything. I already know." And with that, Emma Carter, the girl who had once written a childhood promise to meet a stranger in a library, realized that love, after all these years, had found her. In the pages of their shared story, there was no more waiting, only the beginning. As the world outside the cafe continued to turn, the two of them together looked toward the future, not as separate souls, but as one. And for the first time in years, Adrian Hale understood that maybe, just maybe, this was the love story that mattered, the love story that would last. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and for allowing me to share this story with you. As we journeyed alongside Adrian and Emma, we saw how love can bloom in the most unexpected places, how a past forgotten can lead us to something we were always meant to find. Their story wasn't easy, nor was it perfect, but it was theirs. And that, in itself, is a beautiful thing. Life, just like love, isn't always a straight path. Sometimes, it's messy, and the moments we long for seem out of reach. But as Adrian learned, and as Emma always believed, Love is not about avoiding the hurt. It's about embracing the possibility that even after pain, even after loss, something real can grow. So, I hope that, like Adrian, you find the courage to open yourself up to what life offers. Maybe it's a second chance, or maybe it's just the quiet realization that there's more to your story than you thought. Whatever it is, don't let fear close your heart off from the possibility of something beautiful. Remember, sometimes the love we're searching for has already been written in the pages of our past, waiting for us to rediscover it. So keep believing. Keep trusting that even when the storm clouds gather, there is always a chance for the rain to pass and for the sun to shine through. Thank you again for being here. And as you walk through your own life, may you never stop believing that your story, just like theirs, is full of unexpected magic. Until next time.